Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name is Clinton Button, and I'm a granite sculptor. Welcome to video number 174 of the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. Today, this is just going to be a talk video, kind of lecture on an in-between stuff, and I wanted to, I want to point something out, reflect on it, and that may not be the right way of putting it. I had to run down to Elberton, a stone project, and go see one manufacturer, and then had some other meetings planned. And when I was down a couple months ago, I went by the old sculpture studio, Harmony Blue Granite, because it's been dormant for years. But Mike Jones carved there for a little while, and he's been gone. And he's a local folk artist that was carving. And before that, I'm trying to figure out how to put this all together to make sense, to make my point, because it's sort of it's a lot to digest. It's not a simple little 2 paragraphs and it all makes sense. So let me back up to the beginning, okay? Barry, Vermont has always been the big granite center. It's where the sculptor colony is, where the largest concentration of granite sculptors in the United States. And as I mentioned before, I'm the only one of my family that wasn't born in Barry. My mother, my brother, my father, they're all born in Barry. I grew up about, barely 15 miles from the studio where I apprenticed, over in Chelsea. And we were dairy farmers. My father and his father we had Jersey cows and milk cows. That's how I ended up in South Carolina years ago. And my mother's side of the family did stone. And it's pervasive. The house on one edge of our farm was, my mother's cousin lived there. Her father cut stone. It was my grandfather's brother. Friend, he cut stone, and he lived there in Chelsea. He died early. So it's always, it goes deep with my family. And, I'm going to try to figure out the best way to do it, because I don't want to script this video and edit and cut and chop. I want to have a single talk to it. Elberton never had the sculptor colony or the presence, the amount of sculptors that Barry did. In the mid-40s, a sculptor named Richard Cicchini, who had spent time in Barry, moved south to carve in Elberton. And through the 50s and 60s, he was arguably the master sculptor, top sculptor down in Elberton. And he was trained, and he was trained in the industry. He wasn't just somebody that did it on their own. And there were a number of people in Elberton over the years that were self-taught, that were more folk than traditionally trained or industry trained. So anyways, by the mid-60s, it was clear that, he'd been there for 20 years, and, you start looking to the future about who's going to take his place. And so Mr. Kamali in Barry, they're Kamali, and Barry and Elberton, they're Kamali. They went over to Italy to try to recruit some new sculptors, new stone carvers, to come over and carve in the industry. And they were able to contact 2 men, Dario Rossi and Dante Rossi. And Dario says we're cousins, and like I just said, the people next door to me on farm were my mother's people, and they were in Vermont, because we've been there forever, we're related to a lot of people. And I don't know how close or not. Dario says they're cousins, so they're cousins. It all matters to me. So they were over, and they were able to recruit these 2 stone carvers to come over to the States and carve in the industry. And so Dante went to Barry, where he did big stuff. And then Dario came to Elberton and carved there with Mr. Cicchini for the next, until Mr. Cicchini retired and died. This was in 68, early 69, around that time. And they were at Dixie Granite. Dixie was one of the big companies in Elberton. And a competing granite company called Harmony Blue made Dario and Mr. Cicchini an offer that they'd build them their own studio, air-conditioned, standalone studio. They didn't have to be in the shed with everybody else. They could do whatever they wanted time-wise. They wanted to work off hours at night when people weren't around. They could do what they want, and they'd have a brand new air-conditioned, purpose-built studio. And I'll try to put some pictures in here. I took video when I was down the other day, and I apparently pushed the wrong button and I wasn't recording. So I've got some photographs of stills I took of the studio. Dario retired right around 2002, and by the time I got to Elberton in 2003, literally just 22 years ago, like this month, like within a few days of right now, Dario had retired, and I went to the studio to meet him and to buy his tools, because I was having an opportunity. I didn't have any tools. I had a couple hand machines, and so I was very lucky to be able to buy Dario's tools, his hand machines, his compasses, his pointing machine, chisels he had. He says, Stone, he's dead to me. He says, no more Stone, I paint. I'm a painter now. And because Dario had retired and he was wanting to paint. And so Dario told me about being in the studio and when they got recruited and everything. And I said, oh yeah, my cousin married young Dante Jr. up in Vermont. They live in my aunt's house. And he says, so we're family, and did the Dario thing. So, that's what I know. But he told me about being there in the studio, and he says, you got named Artist of the Year, Georgia Artist of the Year in '96. So it's the worst thing that ever happened. Everybody shows up, and they want to hang around. They want to know the great Dario. They want to hang around. They're going to be a great sculptor because they know Dario. He says, they do no work. They don't learn anything. They just want to know me. And they're going to be friends, and they're going to be famous because they know Dario. And so he says, I lock the doors. I tell him, get out of my studio. And I lock the doors. And he says, they bang on the door and they bang on the window. He says, I pretend I can't hear them. Just keep carving. And I ignore them until they go away. Because there's a UG down in Athens, there was always a marble carving kind of clique down there. And that sort of was a tangent to Elberton. And the art students would carve marble. And, and y'all are probably wondering why I'm talking about all this stuff and who did what, who begot who, and where this person's from, and how they're related to somebody else, and all this other stuff. I went down a couple months ago, and Dario had gone to the house, and Mike kind of went off, and he hadn't carved for the last few years. It was very obvious something had changed at Harmony Blue at the old buildings, because the shed looked like it was half emptied out, and the studio was standing open, and this bunch of stuff was gone because there were still some models and things on the wall and everything. And I came back and then decided, remembered a few days later, I need to make some calls and see what's going on in Elberton. And so found out that the whole place had been auctioned off. It'd gone through a progression of owners. Harmony Blue sold it to Century, and when Century bought it, I was there that day and talked with George when they closed on it at Century, and George says, "Oh, no, don't worry, the models, there's nothing going to happen to them. They'll be okay. You're going to get them. Just wait, be patient." And because they'd sort of been in limbo for years in this purgatory, and then George retired went away, his son took over, and I started kind of losing touch with what was there and what they were going to do with it. And because Mike might use them, and so the models are going to stay there. And then it sold to another larger distributor that, you know, I really didn't have any involvement with. And then he ended up selling it out, and now it's going to just be used as just warehouse space for a food distributor. They're just going to make it into warehouse space. So I was trying to make sure that the remnants of the sculpture component of the Elberton industry didn't disappear, because this is history to me. This is culture to me. This is our world, and the sculpture work that's done in Elberton largely centered around Mr. Cicchini and Dario, and they did things that aren't done in Barry. They sandblasted detail on their carvings, which is just something we basically don't ever do in Barry. You might sandblast a little filigree on a sleeve or something, you know, but you just don't do big stuff. You know, I'll see if I can put a picture. We found a picture of one of Dario's wall from his mausoleum that he carved was still there at the studio. And a friend was able to buy a bunch of this stuff at the auction. Michael Baston there at Baston Monuments. And he's got a very active perspective in terms of the history and everything. He doesn't want to see this disappear either. And so he got some models. He gave me some models. I'll try to put them in here and show you. I got some video. He was showing me some stones. He had some stones that Mike had done on spec that weren't really anything I could do with. And he had this wall from Dario. And, you know, Dario transitioned to a painter, and his little montage that he's got, this bas relief with a trinity of him and his son and his wife, and he's painting. And that's indicative of his age and his position that he's done being a sculptor. And then in the background, he had little things of Italy, of somebody working a block of stone, represent his origins and his apprenticeship there, learning to carve in Italy. And there's a mother and a child with the old buildings that I assume represents him when he was inspired and he wanted to do stone. And then I find it's ironic because in order to show everybody he's a painter, he's got to be a sculptor to carve the stone to show him painting, which I think is really cool. And Dario he's a great sculptor. He's not a finisher. That's not what he was trained at. But Michael had these models. He had some tools for me that had gotten missed. He got a set of clay tools, and they're literally boxwood sticks. Just like I told y'all, just like I make for me. The same exact boxwood sticks that I make, all bumpy and everything. It's just so cool to have. They've been sitting there in the studio for decades. Now they're here, so they don't get discarded. Just like the models, and the studio is pretty empty. And before we left, I was able to buy the suction booms. You know, these yellow suction booms behind me. I was able to buy the units out of the old studio there. And a couple of them are good, and because they're just nobody's going to ever do anything with them again. They're not going to be carving stone in there. And so you look at it two ways. You can put the studio to bed, it's done, you finished it. You did everything except tear it down, it's done. Nobody will ever cut stone in there again. Or I was able to save something out of it to put it to work here, because the suction booms I got out of Dario's studio are the new, more modern. They have a spring ballast instead of this big cast iron weight, and they clear my crane better, and so I'm probably going to install them in the center to use them. So I'm able to perpetuate the craft a little bit longer down here. So you're wondering, I'm just sitting here running my mouth, and y'all are wondering why I'm talking, why I'm bringing this up. I keep telling you it's important to have a reason, a way, a means to separate yourself from the present, from what you're doing right now, because you look at what you're working on and you don't see it. Just like you can hear a sound, but you're not really listening to it. Okay, I've got my old motorcycles and my cars, and I love to cook, and you know, my flowers grow in the yard, and you know, and that's part of Dario. I said, I had all my flowers in the front by the window. They were, you know, it's all grown up with trees now. But you know, he had flowers at the studio because you keep flowers because you carve flowers. It's important to understand habits and how the foliage works, and you know, how nodes and cuticles and stems and leaves, all this so that you can try to do it as well as possible when you get the opportunity to carve something. And while I was coming up in Barrie, Giuliano was, and everybody knew. I mean, all these different people knew, you know, a certain amount here and a certain amount there, and they could tell you who cut what stone, or who used to carve where, or who worked with who for this long, and then they went somewhere else, and then they went somewhere else. But Giuliano Cecchinelli was really the old man telling all the stories for me. That was when I was there. He was, you know, in his he was around 60. I forget. He was how old he was, but he was the one that knew all these things and all these people and what was going on. And so he'd tell us, you know, who came from where and who did what, why they did it, when they moved, what changed them. Because none of this is written down. Nobody knows this. And, you know, when I came to Elberton, I came from Barrie, came to Elberton, and I was trying to get my world going. I was trying to get my studio going. I was trying to work. I was trying to find tools. I was trying to find work. I was trying to pay my bills, you know, and struggling and going without. And, you know, you just prioritize what you're going to do, because you don't go out and take out a big car loan to have big payments because you don't know if the money's going to be steady or not. And a lot of times it just isn't. But you have these opportunities to talk to Dario, to talk to different people that were there. Mr. Kamali. And Mr. Kamali told me the whole thing about going to Italy and looking for Dario and Dante and, you know, what they did and who they talked to, and then, you know, what it was like to have them stolen away within a year or so by Harmony Blue, because it was, you know, they came in and we did all the work and they took them. You know, and that's politics, and you got to understand that when you're in the industry, you're in business, because there's people that will associate you with you or not based upon who you associate with. So, you know, I came up with, you know, Giuliano being the one that told all the history. He knew everything. And I'm down in Elberton, and we're taking, you know, we're walking through the old plant because it's all stripped because they sold everything, and then whatever was left, the crackheads went in and stole all the wire and stole all anything that wasn't nailed down for scrap, and it's all gutted. And so we're taking the suction down, you know, these Rumlin booms that you just can't get. We're taking them down, and I'm telling him Michael was there, and one of his right-hand man employees was there with us, and they did a lot of the work. And I'm telling them all these things, and they hadn't heard this stuff. They didn't know this stuff. They, you know, and like I mentioned, having my different things to go away to, work on a bike, work on a car, go cook, to get away from my stone so I can see it when I come back, so I can look at it and I can see that something's wrong and I can fix it, so I get a break. Because I don't live in Elberton, because I don't live in Barrie, there's gaps of time between when I'm there and when I'm not. And I go back, and it's been weeks or months or maybe even a year or two, like in Vermont, where it's a lot longer because I don't go up there like I used to. And you see how things change really easy. You realize that one company's got absorbed into another company, and then they bought something else next door, and now they've got a different, they got sandblast in there where they used to store trucks or vice versa, whatever. And it consolidates, and Elberton's doing the same thing. These old companies are either being absorbed by other companies, or they're just going out of business, and you know, they turn it into a warehouse, or they tear it down for scrap or whatever, and it goes away. And you can look at how many viewers I get on my videos. You know, this is not a high priority to most people. But there's a few people that are serious about it, and it always amazes me because we continue to get, you know, a phone call or an email or a message or something, and somebody say, I'm up to video number 83, I'm watching every one of them in order. And they have positive comments or some questions or whatever, you know, and they've watched, you know, like I said, they watched 80 or 100 or 150 videos, whatever. We watched every video you've done all the way through, and y'all are pretty dedicated. That's pretty cool. But I hope I'm teaching you something. And while I was in the studio, probably for the last time I'll ever go in there, because I'd stop and see Mike and we'd talk, and you know, and I'm in a studio talking to another stone carver, and you know, I don't get a lot of chances to do that outside of Barrie. It's pretty rare. And it always was a very special time for me to connect like that. And so we're in there wrestling these things off the wall, and telling them the stories and the history that they've never heard. And all of a sudden I realized I'm telling stuff just like Giuliano, and that there's nobody left down here to tell the whole story anymore. And it's sort of a moment, you know. I mean, we walked through the shed and we were all, there's so much cool stuff, and this is here and this is there. They took down the 30-ton crane, and you only got these little 5-ton cranes left, and whatever. You know, and we're both way into this, you know, this is having a nerd moment, whatever. But you start realizing that you're the last one. There isn't somebody obvious that's after you, that's learning this, that's going to carry it on, that's going to do it. And so you have the opportunity to perpetuate something because you paid attention and you respected your elders years ago when they talked to you, instead of saying, yeah, I don't care, I just want to buy your tools. Give me your tools, I don't want to listen to this crap. No. You don't know when things are going to change. You don't know when something's going to end. You know, over the span of my life, I've heard more people, you know, I think the one comment I hear around dying is people say, you know, I wish I could just talk to them for 5 minutes. I wish I could ask them a couple more questions, you know, and they could tell me where they did this or where this came from or who that was or how they related or how they met. You can't. You know, we got a limited amount of information. I'm probably not the only person out there that's flipping through a book, you know, I mean, for us old people that actually look at printed books and printed pictures. And you get a little snapshot and you automatically reach out and swipe on it to enlarge it so you can blow it up so you can see more, so you can get more information. You can't do that, okay? You know, and you do have the bad picture and it's all blurry, you can't tell anything. You may be the only source of information on something left. Wrap your head around that for a minute. You know, you may not be into this, you may be into something else, but you may know things that no one else knows, and no one else understands, and no one else cares about. And you can keep that alive, and you'll never really know, probably until after you're done, and you'll never know when it's going to matter. So keep track of things, listen, don't just hear, see, don't just look, and realize that, you know, you may never be relevant, okay? You know, like I said, nobody's beating the path down to my door. But there's a few people that still like this and are interested in this history, and capture it, protect it, take care of it, cultivate it, and then share it with people. You know, that's the whole point of this whole video series, is to keep this information archived somewhere so that people can get it. You know, everybody says, oh, they're going to download your videos, you're never going to get paid, and you're never going to get a dime out of this. I'd rather do it for free and know I'm not going to get paid than put all my effort and time and try to police it and check it and whatever, and then have some knucklehead turn it over and they release all the videos online and I can't stop them and it's done. So I'll just be generous from the beginning. But you learn lessons. You do things the way the old man did it. And it works. That's why they did it. They weren't stupid. And then you find out you're doing the same thing. It's pretty cool. So just be aware and try to save stuff. You know, I don't know what's going to happen. All of mine, everything, this will all go away at some point. I don't know what'll happen to it. It really doesn't matter. It'd be nice to think somebody keeps carving, but I kind of expect it'll disappear, just like Dario's stuff, and just like, you know, these others, because the young people that want to do it don't necessarily have the money to buy it, and the old people that want to do it that can buy it don't have enough time left to make it work. So where does it go? But learn, and so you don't have to repeat the same things. The best thing about having people go before you is they can break a path. They can accrue knowledge to share with you that you don't have to learn the hard way again, because for the most part, everybody that is a craftsman, I think they have a goal in themselves that they want to help somebody be even better than they are, by saying, okay, there's no reason to do it that way. We tried it, it doesn't work, do it this way. And you do it that way, and you start it here instead of starting down here and having to work your way up to here. You know, because the goal is if you start here, you can go a lot further, even if this is as far as I ever got. You know, I can look at Dario's work and see things that I would do differently, because my training is in a different capacity than his. He wasn't trained as a finisher. I was. So there's things I can do that doesn't look like he could do. But he's a really fantastic sculptor. You know, and I struggle to do things that he does well, you know, so, you know, everybody's unique. All right, like I said, I hope y'all are patient enough to watch this and listen. It just was really sobering to stop and be like, wow, now I'm almost 60 and there isn't somebody else just out there. And so it's up to me to make sure that I at least put this down and capture it somewhere. So it is information that's stored and archived so somebody knows. And because Mr. Zucchini, he worked until 79 or right around 80, and he was dead within 6 months. And Dario worked, as far as I know, Dario hadn't passed yet. Dario's been retired for a little over 20 years. And, you know, people go away, buildings go away, you know, whole entities that you created go away. And 20 years ago when I got started, I really wasn't envisioning, you know, I had ideas, but I didn't really understand how I'd be in 20 years or more. Especially I'd be doing videos like this. I mean, it's just crazy. So, listen to your elders, pay attention, listen to learn to listen, and, you know, try to keep doing more. Thanks again for watching. My name's Clint Button. I'm a granite sculptor here at Carolina Sculpture Studio with the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. Thanks for coming in.